You're listening to the Canned Fruit Podcast with your favorite trio, Danielle, Jess, and Kia. We will have meaningful conversations on what it looks like to have compassion and respect when communicating with others. This show is a safe and brave space to open up, so let's start. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Canned Fruit, where we are talking about all things candid and fruitful conversation. I am here with the amazing Kia and Jessica. Hey gals.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
So per usual, we've got another awesome topic today, but we are continuing down this conversation, because it's our collective conversation about how to have more fruitful and candid conversations. And so if you're doing a drinking game by now, you should just have a conversation. But all jokes aside, it's really important. Today's episode, I think it's a really important one, and it's talking about standing in your truth. I have lots of opinions about this, but I'm curious to hear, just off the cuff, ladies, what do you think when you hear the word standing in your truth?
Standing in your truth, to me, is when you, when you understanding that, and since this is for difficult conversations, it's understanding that what you believe is valid. And I don't even know how to put these words to it but yeah, basically I know that what I'm bringing to the conversation, what my beliefs, my thoughts, my everything that I'm bringing to the conversation are valid, while also acknowledging that the other person is bringing everything that they're bringing to the conversation, and that I don't need to sway myself for what they're bringing to the conversation.
I like that. I like that it's a form of, like, I don't know, that reads as very confident to me, saying like, yeah, I believe in myself. Like, I know this to be true for myself. I think that word truth is tough here, but we're putting a word in front of it that I think is really important. Your truth, right? It's your individual truth. It's not anybody else's. So you get to define that for yourself. And so I think it's kind of a combination of actual honesty, like telling the truth, and being true to yourself. It's kind of a combination of those things to me.
Because sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking about the Truths with a capital T episode. And to your point, we were talking about, the your in front of truth. And what it brings to my mind is that when we talked about truth with a capital T, it included honesty, active listening, introspection, validation, and empathy. And we've been talking a lot about where where you are in a conversation being just as important as where the other person is in the conversation. So I'm tempted to think that when we think about truth, it's almost like we're going through some of those layers of truth. Are you honest with yourself? Are you listening to yourself? Have you taken some time to really think about where you're coming from so that you can show up in the conversation and be grounded? I almost feel like these are the roots, if we're going to use analogies, like these are the roots of that truth. And that's why you can hold fast to where you are as compared to being swayed by what somebody else is bringing.
I think that speaks to a lot of the difficulties that people have in standing in their truth, because I'm thinking this is not something that I personally struggle with, standing in my truth. I feel like I show up pretty authentically in most of my conversations, to the point where people see me as aggressive instead of assertive. And that's something that I'm working on, pulling back my truth, pulling back on the honesty so that I do it with kindness. But there are people who experience it in the other way, in that, like, I show up as passive in conversations. And so I really struggle with standing in my truth. That might be where other people come from. it's hard for me to understand that. But when you put it in the tree analogy of like being rooted, understanding, having a deep understanding of where you're coming from and what's important to you, that might be an easier way for some people to understand what it means to show up and stand in your truth.
And I mean, it really just, this analogy is accidental, but I do think it flows well, because even like with any kind of like tree or plant, there's growth, there's change, right? And so you can be rooted in these very powerful concepts of knowing who you are. You've thought about it, but that's ever growing, that's ever changing. And so there's got to be a distinction between saying, you say left, so now I go left, you say right, now I go right, versus, and then the other option, which is, I see you in that, Jessica, that I'm also one that doesn't have much of a problem standing in my truth. But there's the other extreme of always sticking and not being mindful to the change. I just think that it's really important to remember that as we think about this analogy, if you're rooted in these very important components of truth, that like trees, we have to be open to the elements and open to growing and altering based on what our environment's sharing with us, because information changes, right? And interpretations can be altered by lived experience. So those being grounded isn't being so locked in that there's no change, but it also can be this really balanced place of knowing who you are, knowing what you believe, and knowing what you stand for, but also being open to listening to the other person.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
I'm just loving this analogy. The further and further you go with it, it's perfection, literal perfection.
It is the definition of accidental perfection, though. But we'll take it. We'll take it. So so one of the other things that I think is interesting, and a good example of standing in your truth kind of come up when someone tells you no. And so the reason why I bring it up is because we've talked now about setting limitations and expectations, right? We've talked to a good extent about the importance of needing to have that line and saying, this is my space, and respecting mine and respecting yours. But what does that look like, in terms of like, what's the difference between standing your truth and setting these limits and expectations? Are they the same? How do those relate to each other? Because I see the overlap, but it's not as clear as kind of like the truth with a capital T.
I feel like I want to say the word battle, but I feel like that's kind of a harsh word.
No.
But it's an exchange, there we go, where you set your limit, or you understand your limit and you set your boundary. And if someone is confronting that limit or boundary in a way that you're not comfortable with, and you push back on, you say no, and they're like, well, no to your no, where I don't agree to your no. And we talked about that a little bit in the last episode, but just standing in your truth, in this instance, at least, I feel like standing in your truth when you're combating someone going against your boundaries and your limits is communicating that, saying to them, this is whatever it is, this is my limit, this is my boundary, you're crossing that limit, you're crossing that boundary. If you're able to, leaving that conversation, leaving that moment with that, but just communicating, letting them know, you've made me uncomfortable, you have said something offensive, you have done whatever it is. I think in every conversation, communication is important, but especially when there's some type of exchange, aka difficult conversation going on.
So based on what you're saying, Kia, I'm having some reactions, positive ones, but I'm revisiting experiences that I've had where, again, I feel very aligned with Jessica that I'm often the one that has the strong opinion, but that never means that I don't want the other person to speak their truth. Like, those two things don't have to, it's not that I'm speaking my truth and then somebody else now has to have a small voice. It's that belief that I can say no and you can say no, but I'm going to keep saying no. right? And I'm not offended in an ideal world. I'm not offended by your no to my no, because it doesn't change. If we're sticking with this tree analogy, I've accepted what the environment's saying, and I'm still saying no. I'm making an active, constant, like a consistently evaluated decision that this still is a no for me. And then we just have to figure out how to like, maybe we do need to physically separate. You need to just go on your business about your day. I have this ability of attracting people that are a little bit more introverted than me in a lot of cases. And I don't think introvert equals wavering opinion, by the way, and that's what I'm not saying, but for
no, me neither.
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because I've seen it work the other way, and some of y'all kids.
Because we keep getting collected by extroverts. So they're like,
but I do think that I've met people, and so maybe that's less of an introvert extra thing, more of a where are they rooted in this particular topic or whatever the topic might be at hand. And I find myself getting more frustrated when people fluctuate. I actually wouldn't mind if someone was in opposition, because then we could come to understand each other a bit better. When you waver, what it says to me is that there is, what I'm learning thanks to Enneagram, is that maybe that person just doesn't care that much, right? So I can't make a value judgment on them because they waver. But what I can do is say, is this important to you? And then the answer can't be maybe. Right. Or it can be, but it can make it more frustrating. It's harder to build that relationship and get an understanding in the conversation if I never get grounded in what your basis is. So there's a lot being said there, but I just want to note that I do feel strongly that I can have an opinion and you can have an opinion. I can be strong and you can be strong. I'm not in my strength. I'm not trying to silence you. And that's like, you is the other person, whoever's in that conversation, regardless of who they are or what demeanor they have. I'm just coming to the conversation with my truth and how I've been, my lived experience. And while that can be perceived as aggressive, while that can be perceived as trying to silence someone, and I welcome pushback on this, I'm not really trying to silence you. I just have something to say to everything you say. That's been my problem since I was a kid, right? Like I always have a comeback. I always have a thought to your thought. But my goal is never to silence you. It's that I have a new thought or I want to navigate this differently. So I'll stop there because I'm not sure I'm being fully clear, but I just feel like there's a lot of, I end up being on this like, well, you're loud and I have to be quiet. And I'm like, that's not it. You can be whoever you need to be. This is just me showing up who I am. Absolutely
agreed. And like, you're speaking to one of my strongly held beliefs. If you have an opinion that's contrary to mine, if you have an understanding, a belief, a moral, a thought, whatever it is that is contrary to mine, you can continue to have that thought that's contrary to mine. And what I also want to know is more about that, because I'm not thinking like that. I don't have that idea. I don't hold that same thought. And so if I'm inquisitive, it might sound challenging, but really, I just want to understand. I want to know more. And so I think for a lot of people, it can come across like that, like, oh, you are trying to change my belief, when really it's just, oh no, I just want to understand why you believe like this. So I'm asking these tough questions. So yeah. And the questions aren't based on like, and they also you can answer the question and still stay where you, like I can answer your question, Kia, and still stay where I am. Yep. I can answer that question, but I don't have to receive it as you altering me. If the question is yielding answers that are encouraging me to grow in a different way, then I need to be open to that. But if it doesn't change my stance on X, Y, and Z, then it doesn't change my stance. I know, Jessica, you were going to say something there.
Yes, I guess I'll just start talking because it's not a fully formed thought, but I'm listening to you both. And I'm getting the impression that when people do not have a truth, they feel threatened by other people's truth. So because if you and Kia were having this conversation, this hypothetical conversation, and you were both standing in your truth, then you would both be able to say like, okay, that's that person's truth. I'm able to hold my truth. They're able to hold their truth. I understand baseline the concept of what it means to stand in your truth. So I know that I can do it, and I also recognize that the other person can do it. But I'm hearing that there are other people who don't understand the concept at all. And so when they're told an opposing truth that they don't fully believe as truth, they've just been told to think that way, they see it as a threat to their own truth, in quotes, right? To the other thing that they've been told to believe by somebody else. And now they have another person telling them to think a different way. When instead that really difficult task of introspection hasn't been tackled. Like, what do I think is true? What feels right in my body? What feels right to my soul? Not just what I've been told by this person versus what I've been told by this person.
I don't have a response, Jessica, but you've, as usual, opened up a entirely other aspect that I hadn't considered this assumed or adopted truth.
Yeah.
I don't even know, like, we have to come up with a new word for that, because it's not yours. It's not your truth. It's someone else's truth that you have assumed.
So I have a question then. Can you have a candid and fruitful conversation without knowing your truth?
No.
Well, yes.
Oh, okay.
So I landed at yes. Let me hear both of you first, and then I will partake in there.
I think because you're allowed to change your position. I mean, we're talking about like the tree and the root and all that stuff. Like, it's hard to like uproot a tree and then it survive, but we're always growing, right? We're allowed to modify what's true to us, and things happen in life that we then have a new experience to look back on, and we can adapt. And so if you're coming to the conversation either standing in your truth, knowing what that truth is, or with a growth mindset, which we've mentioned before, of like, I don't know about this. I don't have a truth yet, but I'm willing to listen to this other person and see if it feels right to me, right in my body, right to my soul. Then you can internalize that. You can grow with that. So I don't think you have to have a truth to have a candid and fruitful conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so I interpreted it a little bit differently, which is why I got to my no, which is I was thinking of someone. So sorry, the question again was,
can you have a candid and fruitful conversation without knowing your truth?
Okay, so I tied it back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, where my assumption was that this person had an assumed truth and that they were going to stick to that assumed truth without growing, without acknowledging that, well, maybe this actually isn't true for me. And so I was thinking, no, you can't have a candid and fruitful conversation if one, it's not your truth, but you're going to fight for it. And two, since it's not your truth, but you're still going to fight for it, I don't see how you could be open to any form of learning about the other, I guess, opposing side of that conversation. But I still agree with Jessica. So a yes.
Well, yours makes sense too.
So the way Jessica says yes, the way I say no.
Yes.
Well, so my one add in there is I said yes, but because I'm a huge believer of just speaking to your feelings, right? And if you came into the conversation and someone you don't have a truth on this, saying that I don't have a truth on this, right? Like, you can have a candid conversation and just speak to the fact that this is not something that you've thought of. There is no shame in not knowing. And, when we were talking a bit before, I had thought about this and I was just like, Kia, I mean, all three of us come to difficult conversations informed, but we laugh because Kia's like a researcher at her core. Like she can't not research. Right? But there is this need for expertise a lot of times in this judgment of, I can't come into the conversation if I'm not an expert, or if I say something, I will be shamed for being wrong.
Yeah.
And that's something that happens across the board in any conversation, is if you come into a conversation unprepared, you're not forgiven for the mistakes you've made, you're shamed for the mistakes you made. And in some cases, you shouldn't have come to the conversation that unprepared, but from an enlightened place, we've all been in situations where we were not fully informed and made opinions based on that lack. And some of those situations might be small and some of them might have been big. And so I say all that because I'm thinking about this question. Can you have a candid conversation? Yeah, you can, if you're honest about where you are and come from a place of knowing that, or a place of freedom that you don't have to be an expert on everything. This is your opinion based on the information you've had, right? If your information has been that certain communities are less than you, well, come to the conversation saying that, but also come to the conversation knowing that that information may be inaccurate, right? And I wonder how many of these like really heated debates where people actually come to conversations open to the fact that they might not know everything about that topic, or being okay with the fact that, or the other party, right? The other party that might have the higher footing, not shaming the other person for not knowing either.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just an interesting balance in, can I be truthful and not an expert and come into a conversation? Yeah, you can. You can just say, I'm not an expert on this. This is what I know to be true, but I know that it might not be all of it.
Yes, that's definitely been one of my biggest growth points is I would not, there we go, because I'm growing. I wouldn't enter a conversation if I felt like I didn't have, facts to back me up, or that I didn't have an understanding of the situation or whatever it was. And it's one of the reasons why I've kind of garnered this reputation, I guess, as a know-it-all, because if I don't know it, there's no reason for me to speak. So the only time I'm speaking is if I have a lot of knowledge or expertise in that area. There's like, because if I don't, then I'm not going to say anything. So that's why it's like, well, you're always right. Yeah, because if I'm wrong, why would I even open my mouth? Like,
So can I just throw out another option though?
Sure.
For my friends, not you, Kim, because you do have strong opinions, right? And you're right. You don't come into a conversation unless you're well thoroughly prepped for the conversation. If you ask Kia about Cheetos, she'll tell you about the Cheetos. But I'm curious about how you all feel about this. I love hearing certain people talk, right? I love hearing their thoughts on topics. Like if I care about you, I want to know where you stand, even if it's like just a pinky toe in the water, because I get to learn, like, even as I talk about it, like I get to learn a little bit more, as I think we joked a few episodes ago that the fact that I get to be with you, Kia, and you, Jessica, is like a miracle in itself, because you both have demeanors that kind of say, give me 50 feet. And but what is great about that is, as you all have allowed me to just get to know just that little bit of a pinky toe into your lives, I felt very grateful, whether or not it's been an expert, maybe it's been an opinion, maybe it's been fact, maybe it's been something that's been changed in how you feel since the time I met you. But just knowing that little bit helped. And not from a nosy place. I know we've talked about that, Jessica, but from a place of, can we relate? Can I understand more about you? Can I learn a bit more about you? That's powerful. So I want to share that, because there have been people that are relatively quiet, and when they start talking about anything, I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you for opening up your mind and your heart and your mouth, to share what you think about the world and the world that we both live in.
I've noticed is that I use this term, I used it a little bit earlier, that I get collected by extroverts. And so it's like, I don't know a lot of people around me whose opinions I don't already know about a lot of subjects.
That's
so
fair.
I was just trying to think if there was anyone, and I can't right now.
Well, I'll just throw out that I have a lot of extroverts because we seem to attract everybody. We attract everybody.
That's fair. Yeah.
I said collect. You collected me.
Yeah, sorry. But what I was thinking is that, for example, my partner, he's very thoughtful, but also very quiet. And I think what is interesting about interactions with him and how I've seen him and people like him engage in the world is that there is an opinion there. There is an opinion there. And either by lived experience, training, being, the emotional ego bruise every now and again. For some reason, some people kind of brush that off or have been trained to brush it off. And some people have been trained to Takia, maybe more to your point, keep it in until you're sure.
Shield themselves from it.
Right. And I found it really not necessarily always empowering for me because we get into more conversations now, but there is something to be said about there was a lot of time where it was just there's an opinion there, and this goes back to being a big energy. It's that big energy can make other people feel like they need to shell up. And yes. I'm no, we can both be big energies, or you don't have to be an energy like me, but you can have an opinion. And I know you have an opinion and it's not going to taint my impression of you. So I don't know if that was particularly helpful, but I just think that I have witnessed people with strong opinions feel as though that they can't or that they shouldn't because of a number of reasons. And I just welcome anybody listening to remember that those opinions, those thoughts, those truths that you have are important. We just always need to be really prepared to grow and learn in the conversation too. And so I know I'm talking a lot, but there's the other thing I wanted to say to something Kia said earlier about kind of when we were talking about no's and how you address them. If someone really cares about you, this goes back to something you've been talking about a long time ago about do you have the energy? Do you want to give this person your energy? I have heard no's from people that matter to me, and it may have given me a negative reaction in the moment, but it's rare that I don't go back, think about it, and come back to it and say, that was your truth. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing it with me. How long it takes for me to get there, that's on me. That's not on them. But I just want to just name the fact that these truths, this, and what we think about as truths, there's often things that are combative to the other person, right? Something that makes the other person feel off-putting. Because if the truth was, you're great, again, it's less of a challenge, right? But it's when that thing is in opposition to somebody else, that's when it comes up as an issue. And so I just want to also welcome that in the practice of standing in your truth, there are going to be people, there are going to be reactions that are not necessarily positive if the other person's on the, affronted by what's happening. But the practice is continuing to do it because you'll realize that that people that matter, the people that respect you will come back to the conversation, will come back to you as a person.
Well, these last two things that you've said are really linked. They're intimately linked, that a person can feel as though they can't be truthful or stand in their truth. And that sometimes people have reactions to people standing in their truth. And so if anybody is struggling, if you're one of those people who's I never actually say my opinion, then my advice would be to practice first standing in your truth with people who do care, with people who are like what Danielle has just said, who will come back to it and say, I appreciate your honesty. I appreciate your opinion. Please continue to share them with me. Because if you don't start there, you're just going to get bombarded with other people's opinions and truths. And you'll always feel like you shouldn't have shown up.
I love that you say practicing that with people who you do trust, who love you, will come back to you. And because last episode we talked about how I'm working on my emotional intelligence. I just literally did a workshop on emotional intelligence this morning. And one of the things was practicing in, trying to practice in safe conversations, a conversation that is easy. Don't try and practice your emotional intelligence in a very hard conversation. Like, oh, let me practice now. No, try and practice, when you're just talking about your spouse's day, when you're asking a coworker what they did over the weekend, like just practicing those easy ways. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that's good. And I was just thinking, like, for every skill you're trying to build on, try and practice when you aren't feeling threatened.
Yeah.
When it's a safe way to practice, because you don't practice for the World Series, in the World Series, right? It's like that's not the practice time. So just whatever skill you're working on, you're building on, especially these conversational skills, practicing them, and you'll realize every day you're having conversations, whether it's via text, whether it's via social media, whether it's face-to-face on the phone with your spouse, with your friends, with your coworkers, whatever it is. And you're like, you know what? I can practice a little bit of this now and just take that time for you.
So there are so many really interesting things being discussed here. And then I just looked at our kind of like our where we want to keep the conversation. And I'm like, there's so much more we want to cover. So just thinking that we always have like our quote. And so I'll read the one that he had told me not to read. And it's the person who at any stage of a conversation disagrees should at least hope to reach agreement in the end. He should be as much prepared to have his own mind changed as seek to change the mind of another. No one who looks upon disagreement as an occasion for teaching another should forget that it is also an occasion for being taught. And this is from Mortimer J. Alder, How to Read a Book, the Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading. And there's so much to unpack here, but give me your thoughts on this quote.
Well, my initial reaction is that this is kind of what we've been talking about so far in this episode, that if you approach a conversation with a growth mindset and you don't take the position that standing in your truth makes you holier than another person, makes you better than them, makes you more educated, you're going to end up learning something from the other person too, not just teaching them. You might learn why they haven't learned what you've learned yet, but you're at least going to learn something.
Yeah.
I just like that last, maybe it's because I'm in the field of adult education. I like that last part, which is no one who looks upon disagreement as an occasion for teaching another should forget that it is also an occasion for being taught. And I was trying to think of a semi-safe topic, which I don't know how safe this is, but for example, trickle-down economics, right? So there are people who are on both sides of this issue. Some believe that trickle-down economics work. Some believe that it doesn't work. But if I'm going to go into a conversation with someone about this, then not only am I going to tell them why I think it doesn't work, they're going to tell me why they think it does work. And yeah, no, that's it. But at the end, they could still believe that it's working or hasn't had the chance to fully work out yet. And in the end, maybe my mind wouldn't change. What I would be is more enlightened on why some folks think that it works.
Yeah. I mean, this quote doesn't say like, change your opinion, right? It says learn something.
Yeah.
And I think people think that they're the same thing. People think that like, oh, my entire position on this has to be changed for me to have learned something. That's not the case.
Well, so that brings us into the concept of resolution, right? What does that actually look like in conversation? And maybe we need to spend more time digging into that independently. But when you stand in your truth, does there have to be resolution, or is there success in the fact that you stood in your truth?
Man, I think I need to pull a U2 and Google the word resolution here.
I think while Jess is Googling, I think, what do I think?
Just so you know, Kia, I always want a resolution. I think when it is with someone I love, I want a resolution because it feels better. When it's with someone when we're having a discussion about something more heated, and I guess it's hard because like I can have heated discussions with people that I love, but I'm thinking about the colleague that is saying something that is offensive at work. And do I want resolution there? I don't think I need resolution there.
So resolution is for me. Like, I don't need resolution. Like, the resolution is for me. It is my resolution. They might feel the issue is resolved in a way that's good for them, and I might feel it's resolved in a way that's good for me. And they might not be the same resolution. In the next episode, we're going to talk, in the next episode, we'll talk a bit about apologies. And I feel like maybe that's a type of resolution, and is quite honestly for me, as an apology in essence is for me as much as it is for the other person. But a resolution in general, I'm thinking that's just me. That's how I want this to end.
I totally agree with what Kia is saying, especially now that I've read the definition. Let me read you the definition.
Oh yes, please tell us.
Resolution: a firm decision to do or not to do something. Oh. So I think we think of it in like
kumbaya.
Yeah. And like a positive outlook, some kind of like, that's the connotation, but that's not the definition. And so I'm kind of agreeing with Kia that like, it's for me, I can choose. And to me, it comes back to that truth. I can choose to modify my truth or to continue down the path of the truth that I held before the conversation, right? I can take what I learned and add it to the truth that I came with. Or I can say, I'm glad that I learned that about you. I'm glad that I learned that about the thing we were discussing, but I don't need to add it to my truth. And that in itself, your own decision of what you're going to do with that conversation is the resolution of the conversation.
Yes. Like how you're just saying, like we think of resolution as like kumbaya, we all agreed, everything's happy. The resolution could be that, wow, Danielle and I don't see eye to eye at all on that.
Yep.
Ever. And that's just how it is. Like that's just the resolution. We don't agree and we're not going to, maybe.
So I am the one in a group, maybe this group, that tends
for example,
be very sensitive about the environment, but not in like in a global warming kind of way, but like in a room, I can read the vibes of people. Like, is this person happy right now? Is this person seems really uncomfortable? Oh, this person could have said that differently. And we'll go into this a bit because I think it's really fascinating, tone policing. But if someone had said that a little bit different, I can tell that interaction would have gone differently.
Yeah. Right.
And so what I hear you all saying is that what you're really, in my mind, you're really resolved with whatever outcome happens with you being independently resolute. Because if you use the definition as it is defined there, which I think is brilliant, and actually I would much rather that be the definition than the one I've carried, which is like, we're all kumbaya together, right? And we figured it out. But the resolution could mean that it's awkward AF after this resolution, right? Yeah. And what you two are saying is that you're not only using the proper definition of resolution, you've made a decision, you're done. You're also resolved from an emotional intelligence perspective with whatever awkwardness happens after the fact.
Yeah.
I can't always say that that's where I am. I tend to land in a resolution either way, but I then feel the repercussions of it strongly. So that doesn't change. Again, this is about knowing your roots, standing in your truth, right? if you stand in your truth, however that awkwardness makes you feel, you're going to stick with your truth. Right. Yeah. And I think, when I hear you all talking about it, I instantly was just like, oh, they're 100% okay with the awkwardness that could come after. While I think about that awkwardness, I revert back into, am I standing in my truth? Do the reason stand? And then I make the decision that, yeah, that awkwardness it needs to be, right?
If we're talking about like a colleague type situation, we maybe have a social justice-y type conversation at work, realizing we're not on the same side. I can continue to work with you in a professional capacity. But when you talked about the awkwardness, if it ended up impacting our professional relationship, then I have no problem addressing it and seeing what needs to change, what would need to change in the environment so that we could continue our professional relationship, because someone can be just a colleague. Some people need to be friends with all their coworkers. I do not need that. You can be a colleague, you can be a friend, you can be a friend and a colleague. Remember, I have no problem setting boundaries. This is
She's fine with it.
Yeah, I agree with that angle, Kia. I think that makes sense and obviously it makes sense for you, but I think as I'm processing this, it makes sense for me too. But again, I think in our trio here, there is a population missing, in that there are the people that will value the awkwardness over whatever budding roots they have. And so that's the only reason why I wanted to put words to that social environment component, because standing in your truth is never a bad thing and won't always yield negative results. It's not standing in your truth equals bad in awkward environment, but there are going to be those moments where that happens. And again, just encouraging people to take that, to continue to practice, like you said, Jessica, and see that, okay, there might be that awkwardness, but that doesn't outweigh the truth that you needed to carry.
That's exactly what I was about to say. What's more important, the environment or your truth? Right.
I've just, as we've been talking this, because I have this thing about words, sometimes in environments or when people are talking, just words stick out to me. And as we've been talking bravery, just how brave you have to be to stick to what you believe without being, I'll say, unnecessarily swayed, because someone could say something that's actually a good point and that does sway you. But understanding what you believe, being confident in what you believe, just takes a lot of bravery. So if you're not currently doing it and you're working up to it, then great. That's what this whole podcast is about, growing and being better. There's a book called The Person You Mean to Be by Dolly Chu, I believe is how you say her last name. And it talks about how we, in a fixed mindset, we think of ourselves as a good person. And then if anything attacks that persona that we have of ourselves as a good person, then we feel threatened, right? But if we think of ourselves as always growing, of being a better person, when we are challenged in a way that might make us feel like we're not being a good person, then we just continue to grow. We continue to try and do better, instead of being, oh, I am a good person, you are wrong, you've now threatened my identity type thing. So I just think about that.
I always think about this, that there's an and, right? So you can be a good person and be flawed, which is basically everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
That might be a truth with a capital T. You are good and flawed. And you're so right, Kia, because I'm thinking again, a lot of our conversations started about racial justice in the United States, which speaks directly to what you're talking about, that I'm good, I believe these things that are being attacked. Now this person is attacking my goodness, not attacking the thought process and the logic. And in some cases it is attack, right? And that goes back to us saying, both parties, whatever side of the conversation you're on, you need to be thinking about that. But that good and flawed gives space to say, I can learn, I can grow. And I hope we can like keep revisiting that concept, because I wonder how it manifests in a lot of different conversations. If I make a mistake at work, am I good and flawed? So I can still be a good person. I can still be a good professional
and still
and
be competent.
I can still be competent and make a mistake and learn from it, right?
Yeah, right. And grow. Yep.
Phew. I have so many more questions to ask, but I'm just, some of the things that we've talked about are, in studying truth. And I guess like the takeaway seems that we still believe that it's important to do. We still believe it's important to practice, and that it's okay if you haven't come to terms with that truth, but being direct and explicit about the fact that truth you haven't formulated an opinion on yet. Are there any things that we might have missed? But I do think that kind of sums up the takeaways of like the value of standing in your truth. Or maybe that's the question. I'm looking at you, Jessica. Like, what are some of the, like, what's the benefit of standing in your truth in a conversation?
Well, I'll answer your first question first, which is, have we missed anything? And the only thing that I can think of, and this is from personal experience, is kindness. That you can stand in your truth and you can be honest and be kind. And that's something that I'm still learning how to do, because the words that you say and how you say them matter. That another person wants honesty. If we just believe that to be true, that other people want to hear honesty, but they also want to hear it a certain way. They don't want to hear it in an unkind way. That's something that I just want to throw out there, that I'm still working on, the reeling it in, kind of like this brutal honesty kind of.
Funny you bring that up, Jessica, because it was something that I think was initially a part of what we were trying to convey. But as we talked through this, I started realizing that I, like you, have a lot of opportunity for growth in that space, and that it might be beneficial to spend some time digging into our beliefs of what honesty looks like in a conversation and what it can look like in a conversation. And can those two various things be both equally as effective? Are they equally effective? And so I hear you on that. And I look forward to us digging into it.
Yeah.
I already have all kinds of things.
We've got notes, people.
We're still on it.
Anyway, and then your second question was, what's
like the value,
what's the benefit?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really difficult question for me, because I don't know what it's like to not.
You see it so strongly. You see all the value in standing in your truth.
Yes. So I don't have a good answer for that, because it's something that comes very naturally to me.
Yeah.
But I think from a perspective of seeing other people struggle with it, like you were saying earlier, it's never my intention for you to just adopt my truth, or for my truth to be silencing to your truth. And so from a person who stands confidently in their truth pretty frequently, I would just want other people to know that your truth is valid and important and really crucial to other people developing their truths as well.
Definitely.
I just want to add that I see, if you're not standing in your truth, I see the detriment of not standing in your truth is that your needs aren't being met, your thoughts aren't being truly considered, because you aren't expressing your true self. And I see in people who are not as confident in standing in their truth as Jessica, that then they become like, it has negative emotional impacts, like they become resentful, or really that's the biggest one, resentful. But I find it hard to empathize because they haven't expressed what they needed.
So you're presenting something I was trying to get at earlier way more eloquently than I did before. It is that resentment is just like a silent killer, because it not only like turns off the voice of the person, it turns the the way they present, way someone presents to the world in a really different way. And so when I think about resentment, I hear you on not being empathetic about it, but what I've learned from the experience of seeing that resentment show up is that it's learned in some ways, in the same way like we've learned to stand in our truth. The experience have taught other people not to speak their truth, and resentment is the byproduct.
Yeah.
And so it's that feeling of, when you're on the opposite side of it, I'm just like, that's unacceptable, right? But if we really can come into the conversation, if you're the person that's talking with someone that has this resentment, sometimes, again, I'm a huge believer of saying what you feel, and then sometimes putting words to it. Like, I feel like there's a sense of resentment here. Is there something, so sometimes you have to not put words in other people's mouth, but give space and speak to the emotion that they're feeling, because they might not have actually ever put words to what they're feeling.
Mm-hmm. That emotional intelligence.
Right.
And so important. And
that's the thing though, Kia, like, when you're dealing with adults, it's harder to be empathetic because we now know you can Google anything, right? Mm-hmm. But maybe it's like, if this is a person that you're having generally positive experiences with, you're invested in their reality and they're invested in yours, then maybe it is worth having a few discussions about how this feels like a conversation point for emotional intelligence. Maybe they should explore it independently and see what comes from that. But that resentment is, I think, I think it is probably the number one byproduct of not standing in your truth, because you feel stomped on. Unheard, right? And that's why I want to give power to the people that don't have an opinion on some things, to just say, well, my truth is that I don't have a stance. And think about it though, you can't just use that as a default, because the resentment is going to show up either way. Whether you tell the truth or not, it's going to be there because you have an opinion. But if you genuinely don't feel one way or another, the truth and the PowerPoint is saying, I don't have one. And being heard for that truth is equally as important. Few.
Two fews in this show.
Two fews.
On a short fuse.
Oh, here we go. Oh, puns anonymous, I tell you. Oh, well, with that, as always, Jessica, Kia, it is an honor and a pleasure to just chat with you about these things.
Yeah, and go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole, but it's a rabbit hole that we can use, and we hope we can use. Hopefully,
empower other people to use.
Yeah, empower other people. Empower ourselves. But with that, we will see you all next time. Until then, please continue to have candid and fruitful conversations, and we will see you then.
Bye-bye.
Toodles, open up.
That brings us to the end of this Canned Fruit podcast episode. Thank you, listeners, for joining us today. We also want to thank our assistant producer, Brianna Jovan from What's Good Productions. If you enjoyed our show, we invite you to connect with us on Instagram at cannedfruitpod and email us at cannedfruitpod@gmail.com. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you listen to your favorite shows. And be sure to come back next time for another discussion as we continue to have candid and fruitful conversations. Until then, this is Jessica, Kia, and Danielle. And don't forget to open up.